I used to think absence was just silence, empty chairs, a room that doesn't echo the same anymore. But after hearing her story that night, I understood it differently. Absence can scream, louder than anything else, if you once had the chance to fill it. I wasn't supposed to be at the bookstore that late. The neon closed sign was already half-turned when I pushed the door open, muttering an apology to the owner. I just wanted a replacement for the manual I'd ruined at work, oil stains smeared across diagrams I actually needed. And then she spoke. "You know we shut at 8, right?" Her voice didn't sound annoyed. It had the kind of weight that makes you stop and turn. She wasn't the owner. I knew him, an older man with a mustache who rarely looked up from his crossword. She was someone else. Someone who carried herself like she'd been here forever, like the shelves leaned toward her without asking. I stammered something about manuals, about grease on the wrong pages. She didn't smile. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing just enough that I felt like she was measuring me, not my excuse. "Follow me," she said. That's how I ended up trailing behind her through narrow aisles that smelled of paper dust and rain from the jacket she hadn't fully shaken off. I remember the sound of her boots against the wood floor, steady, deliberate. She didn't hurry, but she didn't waste a step either. When she reached the shelf, she ran her hand along the spines without looking at me. I caught myself noticing the faint silver at her temple, the kind you'd miss if the light didn't hit right. "You work with machines?" she asked, fingertip pausing on a book. "Repair shop, across from the diner," I said. "Mostly engines. Old ones. People bring them in hoping they still have life left." Her eyes flicked to mine then, and for a second, I thought she might say something sharp, maybe a joke. Instead, she just handed me the book. Our fingers brushed, only because I was clumsy enough to grab too soon. The static of it lingered longer than it should have. "You'll ruin this one too if you keep reading while your hands are dirty," she said. It could have been teasing. It could have been scolding. I couldn't tell. I laughed, too quick, like I had to prove I wasn't as green as she probably thought. She didn't laugh back, but her mouth softened, just slightly, like she allowed herself the beginning of one and stopped it short. That pause hung between us. The air in the shop suddenly felt heavier, like the dust caught the light differently. I told myself it was nothing. Just a stranger helping me find a manual. Just a moment I'd forget once I got home. But when I reached the counter and pulled out my wallet, she asked, "Do you ever fix things that don't want to be fixed?" It wasn't a casual question. Not the way she said it. I looked up, but she was already sliding the book across the counter, her hands steady, her gaze on the register instead of me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. By the time I stepped out into the street, the shop lights flicked off behind me. And yet the sound of her question has been circling me ever since, like she didn't just hand me a book. She handed me something I wasn't ready to carry. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. But the next week, when I ducked into the shop on my lunch break, there she was, sitting behind the counter, glasses low on her nose, pen tapping against a stack of invoices. The owner was nowhere in sight. She looked up, just briefly, and then back down, as if she hadn't been surprised at all. "You again," she said, not unkindly. I lifted the grease-streaked manual from under my arm. I finished it this time. Thought I'd bring it back before I ruined it like the last one. Her mouth quirked, almost a smile, but not quite. She took the book from me, her fingers brushing the cover like it was something fragile. That small care, given to paper, made me wonder what it would feel like if she ever gave it to a person. "You fixed what was broken?" she asked, glancing at me over the rim of her glasses. "Mostly. Still coughs when you start it up." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, a flash of exhaustion, or maybe recognition. She set the book aside and leaned back, rubbing the bridge of her nose like she'd been fighting off a headache for hours. I caught myself staring at her hands. Not the polished kind you'd expect from someone who carried herself so neatly. No, they were strong, veins faintly visible, a thin scar running across the back of her left one. Not recent, but not forgotten either. "You okay?" I asked before I could stop myself. She paused, pen still in her fingers, and gave me a look like she wasn't used to being asked that. Then, softer than before, "Tired. That's all." It wasn't much, but it was more than she had to give. I leaned on the counter, trying to keep it casual. "You should take a break." Sit outside for a bit. The weather's. She cut me off with a quick shake of her head. Breaks don't fix anything. Work does. That wall was back up, quick as it had dropped. But I had seen the crack. The way her shoulders slumped for just a heartbeat when she thought I wasn't watching. I told myself to leave it alone, but I couldn't stop noticing the small things, the faint laugh lines around her eyes that didn't seem to match the weariness, the way her pen tapped faster whenever silence stretched too long, how she let out a half laugh at something I said but caught it, like she didn't want me to know she'd enjoyed it. When I finally turned to go, she called after me. Don't bring that manual back until you fix the cough. Otherwise, it'll just keep haunting you. Her voice carried more weight than the words themselves. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just talking about an engine. The storm started earlier than the forecast promised, and by closing time the rain was coming down in sheets. I ducked under the awning of the bookstore, soaked through, half hoping she'd already gone home. But she was still there, lights dimmed, leaning over a box of old receipts like she could sort the entire world if she just worked long enough. You'll ruin your jacket, she said without looking up. It's already ruined. I tried to laugh, wringing water from the sleeve. Guess I'll wait it out here. She glanced at the window, then back at me, her eyes lingering just long enough to make the silence feel deliberate. Stay out of the way, then. So I sat on the stool near the counter, the storm filling the room with its relentless drumming. For a while, the only sound was paper shuffling and thunder rolling in the distance. I wanted to speak, to fill the air with something that would pull her attention from the receipts, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I found myself noticing everything else. The way her hair clung damp at the ends, the faint crease between her brows, how her hand paused mid-reach when lightning flashed. She finally set the papers down and leaned back, exhaling like she'd forgotten how to. Long day? I asked. Long year, she murmured, almost too low to hear. That caught me. I turned toward her, but she was already looking away, fingers tracing the rim of a chipped coffee mug. She didn't mean to share that. It slipped out. The closeness was sudden. I hadn't moved, but the storm pulled us into the same pocket of space, everything else outside blurred and unreachable. I almost asked about the tiredness she carried, about the sharp edge in her voice when she mentioned fixing things that didn't want to be fixed. I almost told her I kept thinking about that night, about her question, about the way her hands lingered on books like they mattered more than people. But my mouth stayed shut. And then her phone buzzed. A low, persistent vibration against the counter. She froze, staring at the name on the screen. She didn't pick up, didn't silence it either. The rain kept hammering. Her hand hovered over the phone like it might burn her. Then, just as suddenly, she pushed it aside, closer to me than to her. I swallowed. The air between us felt too thin. You don't have to stay, she said quietly, eyes still on the window. I know, I replied. But I didn't move. The storm wasn't the reason anymore. My hand twitched against the stool, almost reaching for the phone she'd left near me, almost daring to bridge the space she refused to. I stopped myself, fingers tightening instead around the edge of the seat. The distance between what I wanted to do and what I allowed myself to do was barely a breath. The storm had passed, but the air inside the shop hadn't cleared. The lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows on the counter where her phone still lay, turned face down. She hadn't touched it since. Neither had I. For a long while, the only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock, each second louder than the last. I thought maybe she'd forgotten I was still here, but then she looked up, really looked at me. It wasn't casual. It was the kind of gaze that made everything else fade out, like she was weighing something heavy and dangerous in her chest. What are we doing? She asked finally, her voice breaking the quiet like glass. The words hit harder than I expected. They weren't sharp, but they weren't soft either. Just stripped bare. I opened my mouth, closed it again. I didn't know the answer. I only knew I couldn't stop coming back. Couldn't stop noticing the cracks she tried to plaster over. Couldn't stop feeling the pull. She leaned forward on her elbows, hands clasped tightly, like holding herself together. This, whatever this is, can't be normal. You know that, don't you? Her laugh was short, bitter, not meant to be heard. I don't come here for the manuals. I said, the admission low, almost shameful. Her head tilted, eyes narrowing, but she didn't interrupt. I come because I stopped. The rest felt reckless. Dangerous. Because what? She pressed, though her tone wasn't demanding. It was tired. Tired, and maybe a little afraid of the answer. I shook my head, staring at the cracks in the counter's wood. My chest felt tight, like every word I didn't say was clawing for air. She studied me in silence, her fingers fidgeting against each other. For once, she wasn't composed, wasn't guarded. She looked human, vulnerable in a way that made my throat ache. The silence stretched until it hurt. I thought maybe I should leave, give her the escape she clearly wanted. But when I shifted on the stool, she whispered, almost to herself, "You remind me of him." I froze. Who? Her lips pressed together, regret flashing across her face. She shook her head quickly, standing as if distance could undo the words. Forget I said anything. But I couldn't forget. Not when her eyes had softened, not when her voice had cracked just enough to let me glimpse the weight she carried. The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with things unsaid. She turned away, fiddling with receipts again, though her hands trembled slightly. I wanted to close the space, to steady those hands, to tell her I wasn't him, whoever he was. But the only thing I managed was a whisper that slipped out before I could stop it. I don't want to be a reminder. I want to be something you can't forget. The next time I saw her, days had already slipped by. I told myself I'd give her space, that maybe the words I'd left hanging in the air had been too much. But space didn't help. It just made me restless. She was shelving books when I walked in, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up. For a second, it felt almost ordinary, like nothing had been said. But when her eyes found mine, the pause told me otherwise. "You came back," she said quietly, more statement than question. "Couldn't stay away," I admitted, before I had time to edit it into something safer. She exhaled, almost a sigh, and turned back to the shelf. "You shouldn't keep doing this." "Doing what?" Her hand hesitated midair, fingers tracing the spine of a book that wasn't even in the right place. I saw her swallow before she finally spoke. "Letting me matter." The words landed like a stone in my chest. She still wasn't looking at me. Her voice was calm, but her shoulders betrayed her, tightening as though braced for something heavy. "You don't make sense," I said. She let out a quiet laugh, one that didn't sound amused. "You remind me too much of someone I loved." "Someone who?" She stopped, pressing her lips together as if the rest was dangerous to say aloud. I waited, barely breathing. Finally, she turned toward me, eyes sharp and glassy all at once. "He used to sit on that same stool, always with grease on his hands, always with that same stubborn look, like machines were the only thing keeping him alive." Her voice faltered, but she didn't look away. "And then one day, he just didn't come back. Not to me, not to the shop, not anywhere." The silence after was unbearable. I wanted to ask questions, to demand the name, the story, the reason, but the ache in her voice told me enough. She straightened, trying to tuck it all back behind her usual calm. "You don't want to be compared to a ghost." "Trust me." I wanted to argue, to tell her I wasn't him, that my being here wasn't about filling some shadow. But instead, I said nothing, because maybe I didn't know if she was right. Her hand brushed the counter as she moved past me, steady but faintly trembling. And when she spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. "Don't give me reasons to lose someone twice." The weight of it pressed into me, a warning, a confession, and a plea all in one. I didn't move. Couldn't. Because what she didn't know, and what I couldn't say, was that she'd already given me a reason I couldn't put down. I told myself I'd give her time, that maybe her words about loss and ghosts were final enough to keep me away. But time didn't make the pull fade. It just made the silence between us heavier, like gravity waiting to be answered. It was late when I found myself back at the shop. The door was unlocked, lights low, her figure bent over the counter. She didn't startle when I stepped inside. She just looked up, eyes tired but steady. "I thought you wouldn't come again," she said. "I thought the same," I admitted. Neither of us moved for a long while. The rain had started again outside, softer this time, like background music for the stillness in the room. She pushed the receipts aside, as though deciding they didn't matter. "You keep showing up," she said finally. I don't know how not to, I answered. That earned me a long stare. Not guarded, not dismissive, just searching, like she was trying to decide if she could bear the weight of letting me stay. Her hand brushed against a stack of books, straightening them even though they didn't need straightening. You shouldn't tie yourself to someone who already knows what it's like to lose. I'd rather risk it, I said quietly, than not know what this is. The words hung between us, neither of us rushing to break them. She let out a breath, shaky, and for the first time I saw the fight in her give way, not to weakness, but to honesty. I don't have the strength to watch someone walk away again. I stepped closer, slow enough for her to stop me if she wanted. She didn't. We stood there, the counter between us, and for once there were no evasions left. I didn't reach for her, not fully, just rested my hand against the edge of the counter, close enough that her fingers, hesitant, trembling, drifted toward mine. When her skin touched mine, it wasn't a spark. It wasn't fire. It was something quieter, heavier. A truth we'd both been circling, finally acknowledged in the smallest of gestures. Her head bowed slightly, eyes closing as if the moment itself was too much. I leaned forward just enough that my forehead rested against the curve of her temple. No words, no promises, just the shared silence of two people who had stopped pretending they weren't already undone. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, neither of us moved away. And that was enough. I'm telling this now from a different place, a steadier place. Not because everything turned out perfect. Life doesn't bend that way. But because something shifted between us, something I'll never forget. Looking back, it wasn't one single moment. Not the night of the storm. Not the silence that almost broke us. Not even the first time our hands met across the counter. It was all of it. The pauses, the hesitations, the words swallowed instead of spoken. That's what carved out space between us. Enough space for honesty to finally grow. She's still careful, still carries that quiet weight in her eyes. But she doesn't hide it as much anymore. I think she learned that letting someone stay close doesn't mean they'll vanish the next day. And maybe I learned the opposite. That wanting someone doesn't mean pulling them closer until they can't breathe. Sometimes it means waiting, listening, sitting in the silence with them until they're ready. We never called it love out loud. We never needed to. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't rescue. It was two people, broken in different ways, learning how to lean without falling. I think about the first night I met her, how she asked me if I could fix things that didn't want to be fixed. I didn't have an answer then. Maybe I still don't. But I know this. Some things aren't meant to be repaired. Some are meant to be carried, together. That's what changed in me. I stopped seeing her as a mystery I needed to solve. I started seeing her as someone I didn't want to forget, someone whose absence would scream louder than any silence I'd ever known. And somehow, in the middle of all the mistakes and hesitations, she let me stay. That's enough. More than enough. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?